Hey everybody, how we doing today? Yeah, thank you so much for coming out. If you don't know me, my name is Jonathan Hall. I'm a 3L here, and I am the president of the Tax Law Society. I'll briefly introduce my co-leaders. Right here, I have Hillary Nienhaus, 2L, vice president, and Aiden Petrello, also a 2L, also a vice president. We really appreciate all of you coming out today. Hopefully this is indicative of your fervent enthusiasm for the practice of tax law. Maybe it just is something that piques your curiosity. Regardless, we're really excited that you could come and listen to a wonderful panel. I really want to thank the Indiana State Bar Association's tax section, its members and its leadership for cooperating with the Tax Law Society and bringing this together. Hopefully you've already had an opportunity to grab some food, so enjoy that while we listen to a wonderful panel. Right now, I'll turn over the mic to Hillary, who will be guiding us through the next 45 minutes to 50 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Can everyone hear me okay? It's always so weird when you're up here on the microphone because you can't hear the actual volume. So as you can see, we have 5 wonderful panelists in front of us. And as Tax Law Society decided that instead of me controlling the panel and talking a lot as I am wont to do, we would have each panelist talk for about 8 minutes, sharing whatever they think is relevant and helpful to you. So that way we might get some exciting treasures of information that we wouldn't have gotten before. So I will introduce all of the panelists, but then I will turn it over to them, and then at the end of the panel, we'll still have about 10 to 15 minutes for your questions. So starting with Judge Justin McAdam to my left. Judge Justin McAdam was appointed judge of the Indiana Tax Court by Governor Eric Holcomb in July 2023. He earned his undergraduate degrees from Indiana University and his Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School. After law school and before serving on the tax court, Judge McAdam worked in multiple esteemed roles, serving as law clerk for Chief Justice Dixon of the Indiana Supreme Court, working in private practice at Bopp Law Firm PC, and serving as chair and trustee for several Indiana-based organizations and causes. Next, we have an alumnus among us. We have Tyler Masick, senior manager specializing in indirect state and local income tax and franchise tax at Katz, Sapper & Miller, Indianapolis. Prior to joining Katz, Sapper & Miller, Mr. Masick was at Ernst & Young for almost 10 years, where he worked on tax matters. Mr. Masick is an alumnus and received his Juris Doctor from Indiana University Maurer School of Law. Next, we have Adria Price. Adria Price is an attorney with Price & Associates, LLC, and focuses on tax planning and controversy, estate planning, and business planning. She is a recognized expert on the subject of the tax treatment of welfare benefit and defined benefit plans. Ms. Price received her undergraduate degrees from the University of Kentucky, her Juris Doctor from the University of Kansas, and her LLM in taxation with honors from Golden Gate University School of Law. Next, we have Chris Russell. Chris Russell was promoted to General Counsel of the Indiana Department of Revenue, or DOR, in 2021, managing the tax policy team as part of the legal division. Mr. Russell earned his bachelor's degree from DePaul University, his Juris Doctor from the Indiana University McKinney School of Law, and is further enhancing his tax knowledge through the SALT, or State and Local Taxes, certificate program at the Georgetown University Law Center. And last but certainly not least, we have Dan Shackle, counsel with Frost Brown Todd. Dan focuses his practice on local and state government and public finance matters. In 2023, Mr. Shackle was appointed commissioner for the Indiana Department of Local Government and Finance, or DLGF. Mr. Shackle is a former captain of the United States Army and recipient of the Bronze Star Medal in the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal. He earned his bachelor's degrees from Indiana University and his Juris Doctor from Oklahoma City University School of Law. So thank you so much for being here today. And we're going to just go right down the line, sharing for about 8 minutes. I'll let you know when your time is about up so we can pass it on to the next panelist. Judge, would you like to start?
Sure. Tell me if you can't hear me. I'll do my best. So, Justin McAdam, judge of the Indiana Tax Court. I have probably a meandering path to tax law. I didn't set out to be a tax lawyer. When I went to law school, after law school, I wasn't in tax necessarily, but I touched tax sort of along the way in my career, and I suppose it built on me over time. My first experience with tax was actually a pro bono case. It was a property tax appeal that I brought on behalf of a local conservation club who had just, their treasurer had died, and they needed somebody to help them figure out how they get their exemption back that they had. So that was sort of my first experience in tax. And then after that, I brought a federal lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of a law called FATCA, which was adopted, I don't know, over a decade ago on several grounds. Though I didn't get to see that lawsuit to the end. I left that lawsuit behind as I transferred from the firm I was at and joined state government at that point under the governor's office. I joined the Office of Management and Budget. And what I did in that role, I became the general counsel for that agency. And that agency at the state level is not too different from how it's situated at the federal level. It has a pretty expansive view of state government, both in the finance side and the management side. And so as part of that role, I was responsible for overseeing tax and fiscal policy sort of writ large for the executive branch. And so that meant a lot of different things. I was responsible for engaging with the legislature on the governor's policy agenda related to tax and fiscal policy issues. So spent a lot of time advocating in front of the legislature, testifying in committees, working behind the scenes to craft legislation and otherwise. But it also had an administrative component, and I would work very closely then outside of the legislative process with the executive branch agencies in the state who were responsible for implementing the state's tax laws and the state's fiscal policy laws. So that includes a number of agencies at the state. You have the Department of Revenue, you have the Department of Local Government Finance, you have the Board of Tax Review, and a smattering of other agencies who are all engaged in tax in some way. And I would work with those agencies on a number of different topics. Topics like anything ranging from a particular taxpayer, how are we we have this sticky issue with a taxpayer, how are we going to resolve that? What should be the administration's policy with respect to how we address this issue? With respect to this particular taxpayer, to sometimes larger questions of, well, how are we going to approach this tax issue more broadly across the administration? What's going to be our audit posture when we tackle that issue? But that also involved getting involved with litigation. The Department of Revenue in particular is involved in a lot of litigation with various taxpayers in the state related to the enforcement of tax. And so working with them on a strategic basis around what kind of claims are we going to bring? Do we need to use outside counsel? Should we bring expert witnesses in here? How should we approach this case? Is it time to take this case on appeal to the Supreme Court or not? Is it time to bring this case at all? Lots of strategic conversations around those elements as well. And so I had sort of this, through my time at the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, I got sort of a broad picture of Indiana's tax system as a whole, which ultimately led me to be well positioned to apply for my current job. So I currently sit as the judge of the Indiana Tax Court, which I'll come back to that in a minute about what that is, because it's a fairly unique thing and not something that you're probably familiar with. But generally, the tax court has been focused on tax issues, state-level tax issues, appeals arising from state taxes, either at the Department of Revenue, Department of Local Government Finance, the property tax cases that come up through counties, et cetera. And so it's a unique court in that it sits as an appellate level court. So it sits alongside our Court of Appeals. So basically every other appeal, every appeal that's not a tax case goes up through the Court of Appeals, and all the tax cases come up through the tax court. And then from there, you can make an appeal to the Supreme Court of the state. As you can imagine, there aren't a lot of appeals to the state Supreme Court on tax issues. They've only taken probably less than 10 cases in the last 10 years. They just don't take a lot of cases. I don't know that that's particularly unique to tax. They probably take a lot of criminal law cases, but in any particular area, our Supreme Courts are pretty selective about the kinds of cases that they're going to take year in and year out. They have the ability to choose their docket. But the nature of the tax court is such that as an appellate court, it's somewhat unique, not only in the fact that it's focused on a particular area of the law, but also in how it's structured. So unlike the Court of Appeals, which has 15 judges in the state of Indiana and sits in panels of 3 to hear cases, much like the federal courts of appeals do, the Indiana Tax Court has 1 judge, that's me, who sits in a panel of 1 and hears appellate cases. And so what's unique about that is, of course, that places a particular weight on me to make sure that I get the law right, particularly because the only opportunity to appeal after that is one that is discretionary and one that's not automatic. And so, you're not going to get an automatic review of a case or an opinion that comes from me. And because a lot of those cases don't get reviewed, it often means that my opinions are the final word on that particular area of law in the world of tax and may sit for a long time. So that's a very unique posture among appellate courts, not only in Indiana, but nationally. There are other states who have tax courts, but everyone kind of approaches it differently across the nation. I wouldn't say no 2 tax courts are exactly the same. Oregon probably has the closest model to Indiana, but even they are different. New Jersey has a 15-member tax court that hears 30,000 cases a year because they're hearing them all from the very beginning. They're not an appellate court; they're really a trial court in that way. And so courts approach those and states approach those issues very differently. But the sort of that main feature of becoming an expert in tax, offering that expertise, offering an expedited forum for tax disputes, is what the Indiana Tax Court offers, and it's one that we really receive a lot of accolades for nationally from the business community, because for businesses, when you have a tax dispute, you're dealing, if you're a multi-state business or a multinational business, you're dealing with taxes across jurisdictions, and that by itself is very difficult and requires you to hire people like Tyler and Adria and others down here to help you navigate the various tax laws. But the other piece that can hold you up is if you run into conflicts within your state, if you can't get resolution of your questions quickly, if you can't get through that system in a way that is predictable, right? Ultimately, we want decisions that are predictable and consistent year to year, decision to decision. And the Indiana Tax Court offers that, and that's why it was created in 1986, to address a lot of those issues that the business community was bringing to the table and saying, hey, this is a challenge for us. It makes Indiana a less attractive environment for us to make investments in our businesses, to want to invest in your economy. And so this court offers a streamlined opportunity for that. So I'll stop there. That's sort of the gist of how I got here and what my court does.
Thank you, Your Honor. I really appreciated your comments on your desire to create consistency in your opinions. As law students, we're constantly reading opinions, but we don't get to hear directly from the judge about their overall approach. We only see their approach to one particular matter. So next, Tyler, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Okay. Can you hear me? All right. So Tyler Masick, first time I've been back here in 10 years, actually, since I graduated, so it's been really nice. Things are a little nicer, some nicer touches than when I was here last, but thank you all very much for coming out here today. When I was here, sitting in your shoes, when I was a 2L and I could actually decide which classes I wanted to begin taking throughout my tenure here, I decided out of necessity it's probably a good idea to take Introduction to Federal Income Taxation due to the fact that there's the high likelihood that it might pop up on the bar exam at some later point. So I came to law school thinking, oh, I'm going to be a transactional lawyer, right? I want to be more business law minded. I worked for 3 years as a supply chain analyst in between undergrad and law school. And when I came here again, I was thinking more M&A type of law. I wanted to work in the boardroom, that type of thing. And then I got into tax law classes, and it was one of the first classes I really took where things just kind of clicked. I had Professor Letterman. Don't know if some of you have had Professor Letterman. She was very influential, at least with me, with helping understand what was out there beyond law school. And I had the chance to really understand both from a practice of law standpoint and maybe a non-traditional legal path, like what all is feasible. I ended up going that non-law path. I think Professor Henderson's still here, and I know he was a big proponent of looking at non-law as well. But I decided, hey, let's see what's out there, right? I had no clue that attorneys were hired on in droves at accounting firms, at Big Four accounting firms in particular. And so I wanted to be in Indianapolis. My wife's from Indiana. I'm not originally from Indiana, but we both said, hey, we want to be here. And I also wanted to practice with some of the larger businesses that were out there. I still had that business law aspect that kind of drove me here to law school. And ultimately, I ended up in Indianapolis. I worked a year and a half in international tax. That was a great experience, but at some point, with 11:30 calls on a pretty consistent basis with Ireland or the Netherlands, when it's first thing their morning, or when you're waking up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., I was like, this is getting old. And I still wanted to stay in tax law, well, I should say tax advisory services at Ernst & Young, and so kind of dipped my toe into state controversy. So some of you may know, some of you may not know yet, but you cannot practice law if you work for a firm that is owned by non-attorney shareholders, right? However, EY has, and many other accounting firms, tax advisory firms, have the ability to at least go to the Department of Revenue label and see our clients through the appeals process, at which point, if they're happy with the decision, wonderful, right? The letter of finding that comes out. If not, then there's a tax court in Indiana, and we can potentially go and visit Judge McAdam. That's the point at which we would hand things over to a law firm. But we can at least go up to that point. That is what really attracted me. I had the chance to get involved in some research and some writing and writing the appeals to the Department of Revenue, or a protest, as we like to call it. And I guess I knocked it out of the park. And when you're in an accounting firm, you do have a number of attorneys. Most of them tend to gravitate towards international tax. There's a lot of LLMs there, as well as just JDs too. But there's also a number of attorneys as well in the state tax practice. And they were like, hey, what do you think about coming over to the state practice? And I was like, oh, sure. I mean, I like the controversy aspect, but then this is where I'm going to get into what I do on a daily basis. Not only the controversy aspect that I find quite attractive, but I start getting into what we call like tax planning or restructurings of sorts. So when companies are acquiring other companies or divesting or spinning off maybe segments of their businesses, that's where we would get brought in, and we would help them understand, is there potentially a more tax efficient manner in which they can do this so that they aren't spending tens of millions of dollars when they do spin off, or they're going to be incurring much more in state tax if they're acquiring, right? And also helping them understand what they are acquiring from a due diligence standpoint. When you buy a company, you never know what skeletons are in the closet until you go through due diligence. Are they filing for income tax or sales or use tax in every state in which they should be? And if they aren't, how much should they be paying, right? What's the exposure? Because oftentimes there's no statute of limitations on something that's been tolling for a number of years until you actually do discover that there is this exposure. Can you actually help that, right? And so there are ways that we can go about working with states such as Indiana to try to help mitigate that. But that, as well as working with the Department of Revenue on a pretty consistent basis, trying to work things out ideally before they pop up and potentially become issues whether it's alternative apportionment, and just trying to work, whether it's through assessments or audits with the department. We have a very, I like to think, pretty friendly relationship. We see each other, whether it's in the community or at bar events. But it's a very, I would say, particularly like the ISBA, our State Bar Association, like we've really had the chance to get to know practitioners as well as people on the administrative side and the judicial side of our government. It's been really neat. I have come to really enjoy what I do as a practitioner. Never thought I would be a state tax practitioner in a million years. Had you told me that in undergrad, I would have said you're crazy. It's not what I want to do. But frankly, at this point, like I don't really know what else I would be doing. This is what I love doing. I would say give tax a try if you haven't yet. Again, it might pop up on the bar, so you never know. It's always good at least having that as background. But at the same time, if you do, regardless of whether it's tax or not, like keep pursuing those classes while you're here in law school. I took colloquiums in tax because I discovered through my first tax class, my first semester 2L year, maybe this is something I do want to pursue. And so pursue those interests here as well as outside. Help build your network of colleagues because you're going to run across them. It's a very small world in law. But I guess with that, I'll hand things over to Adria, but more than happy to communicate with any of y'all outside of this if you're interested. So thank you very much for the time. Greatly
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Tyler.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay. Okay, I have 4 small children and I'm very good at being loud, so if there's any issues, let me know. I'm Adria Price. I already have a little bit of background about me from the introduction, but I am from a small family firm. I say there's a genetic defect in our family. I'm 3rd generation tax attorney. My grandfather, and I currently practice with my dad and my sister. There's a 4th attorney with us. His last name is also Price. As far as we're aware, he's not related, and that wasn't a prerequisite to being hired at the firm. He just had very similar practice background, and he's a good guy. We have offices in Santa Claus and in Evansville, so I'm the Southern representative here on the panel. My path, although you think, oh, she's 3rd generation, it was kind of like ingrained in her as to that she was going to do tax law, but that's not actually the case. I was a pretty rebellious teenager and wanted nothing to do with what my parents were doing. I did intern for my dad, but doing completely non-legal work. I'd filling cars up with gas and running to the grocery store and that kind of thing. But I did know I wanted to go to law school. But it wasn't until I took a tax class and my professor was just amazing. He was brilliant. He wrote the textbook, but he was the kind of guy that after forcing us to all buy the textbook, he used the proceeds from that to buy us all pizza and beer after the semester was over. So took every class that I could from him, and it was kind of off and running with tax. I want to kind of focus on some tips that I would have for you all as students. One is to consider perhaps getting an LLM. I do have my LLM in tax from Golden Gate University in San Francisco. It's one of the opportunities that I had to actually learn practical advice as to what to do, after law school. Obviously, law school is great for teaching you how to think like a lawyer. I had a professor who said law school essentially takes your brain out of your head, turns it around, and puts it back in, but it doesn't teach you anything really practical. And so certainly if any of you come out of here and you cite Marbury versus Madison in a brief, we've got a problem. But the LLM program taught you how to, what does a tax court petition look like? How do you navigate the myriad of administrative bureaucracy that comes with dealing with tax departments? Great place to network. You meet individuals, obviously, who are very focused in tax, and it's a great thing to put on your resume. It distinguishes you from other applicants because you do have that advanced degree. That leads me to my next tip is, if you aren't interested in an LLM, take advantage of any clinical opportunities that the law school offers. I went to KU Law School because my husband was in the military and we were stationed in Kansas. And I appreciate you all not throwing tomatoes at me because I went to UK undergrad. But in law school, there were 2 clinicals that were available. One was a legal aid clinic and one was an elder law clinic. I took both of them because I wanted that practical experience. Now, the legal aid clinic taught me that was not an area of law that I was interested in pursuing, but it did teach me how to present a case before a judge, how to handle a crying client, how to extract information from that client. Again, practical experience. So a prospective employer is going to look at your resume, and obviously where you went to law school is going to be important, how well you did in law school is going to be important, but they're going to want to know that you actually have some experience that can translate into the actual practice of law. So those two points there. Third one is to get involved. When I was in my LLM program, one of my classmates passed around a notebook and said, if anybody's interested, we're trying to resurrect a group. This was California. It's called the Bay Area Young Tax Lawyers. It was a standing committee of the tax section of the California Bar Association. I signed my name to that little piece of paper, and 21 years later, I'm still very much active in bar association activities. It's a great way to meet people. You're involved. You get experience that way because you're working with a team, you're working with other people, you're putting on presentations. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into that because when you're with a law firm, you're going to be part of a team. It's also another great way to, I'm going to see, how many times I can say great in my 8 minutes here? Great way to bolster your resume, because they're also going to look at what kind of other activities are you involved in. And if you aren't already aware, the membership in the Indiana Bar Association and the tax section is free if you are a law student. So if you're not taking advantage of that yet, please do so, because we have lots of great programming, networking opportunities. Take advantage of that. We offer a scholarship for law students who are interested in pursuing tax. There's a flyer in the back by the sandwiches with the QR code. We are accepting applications for that scholarship now. So if you have any questions about it, you can ask myself, any of us here on the panel, or our wonderful tax liaison, Leah, with our the Indiana State Bar Association. She probably knows more than all of us combined on this tax panel. I also want to talk about all of the opportunities that are available for you in tax. If you are on the fence about pursuing a degree in tax, I would highly encourage you to kind of jump over onto the side of tax. Within the field of tax itself, there are so many different things that you can do with it. I mean, just look at us here on the panel. We all do very different things. There's international tax, there's estate and gift tax, there's controversy, there's all sorts of things that you could do just within tax. And then there's also other opportunities that the tax degree or the tax experience will give you. Like was said with the introduction, I have had the opportunity to do some expert testimony work because of my tax degree. I've been deposed, I've testified in court because of my tax background. I do a lot of consulting work. There's lots of, I'm very biased. I say it all the time, tax touches everything. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a transaction that does not have a tax consideration or consequence to it. So I've been asked questions by local bankruptcy attorneys and divorce attorneys. Also, business transactions, they all have a tax consideration, and that information is going to be very useful to you. There is also different things that you can do outside of just practicing law. You can teach. There's lots of great opportunities in academia, whether it's a full-time professorship or you can serve as an adjunct professor. Obviously, there's the consulting, the expert testimony work. And I would also like to put in a brief plug in for considering practicing outside of Indianapolis or a big city. Not that there is anything wrong with Indianapolis. Obviously, there's a plethora of opportunities there for attorneys in general and specifically tax practitioners. I was born in Indianapolis, so I'm not going to say anything bad about Indianapolis. But coming from a more rural area, there's definitely the need for attorneys. I am probably the only tax practitioner, well, I know I'm the only tax practitioner in my county and all of the surrounding counties, and probably one of two tax attorneys in the whole southern part of the state. So if you're looking for work, there's definitely lots to be had in other alternative areas outside of the big cities. So with that, I will turn my time over, but I do want to thank you all. And if there's any questions afterwards, feel free to come up and ask any of us. That's why we're here for, is to network as well as to provide some information here.
Thank you so much, Adria. I think you really show us how exciting tax can be and how many opportunities there can be. Every time we tell folks that we're the Tax Law Society and we're interested in tax law, the first reaction is usually, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. But just in 8 minutes, I think you've shown us how many things you can do with tax law, and particularly with an LLM. So Chris, it'd be great to hear from you.
Thank you for having us today. I'm Chris Russell. I'm General Counsel at the Department of Revenue. Those are words that I never would have thought would come out of my mouth. We'll get to that in a minute, but the fact that I can stand here, or sit here, I guess, and say tax is actually fun and interesting is a little shocking to me. But anyway, I'm one of several people that have a very non-traditional path to get to where we are today. I was very involved in music growing up. I had several lawyers and a judge in my immediate family, so I was very interested both in music and in law. I was leaning towards going to school for performance in music, but a cousin of mine was at my house for Christmas one year, and he's a drummer. He played with the Beach Boys. He played with Wang Chung back in the 80s when Wang Chung was actually a big deal. And he pulled me aside and started telling me about his entertainment lawyer. He's at all the concerts I play in. He's practicing law. He's combining both music and law into one thing. So that kind of sparked a fire for me. So I went to DePauw as a music and business double with the intention of going to law school and getting into music law. So went to McKinney, got involved with a firm in Indianapolis. Indianapolis being what it is, there's about this much music and about this much sports. So I did do a little bit in music. I had a trio of songwriters from North Central High School that had a #1 song on the Billboard Hot 100 that got very interesting when they decided to sell their rights different than each other. One wanted to retain them. One wanted to sell them off to a major company, and then they all started kind of fighting over that, so that was an interesting thing to learn. But anyway, I was a certified contract advisor with the NFL Players Association representing football players. I worked with race car drivers, race car teams, a lot of the traditional sports, did a lot of non-traditional stuff, had a figure skater, had soccer players. We represented we're in Bloomington, so everybody knows John Cougar Mellencamp, right? So the Cougar that was in John Mellencamp's videos was a client of ours. So a lot of really interesting stuff. After about a dozen years, I decided I wanted to do something a little bit different, went into straight corporate business practice, M&A work, private equity, that type of thing. Did that up until about 2015. And met a gentleman by the name of Adam Krupp, who is currently the commissioner at the Department of Child Services, which God bless him for that. That's a hard job. But he pulled me into state government, into public service. He was appointed commissioner at the Department of Revenue in 2017. He asked me to join him as the director of tax policy. He asked me that not because I had a huge wealth of tax knowledge, but because I was good with managing people. I did survive Professor Jagan up at McKinney, if you guys still know that name. So I did tax policy and then became the general counsel in the summer of 2021. What we do at the Department of Revenue is far more broad of a practice of law than I ever would have imagined. We have 6 functional areas within the department. We have tax policy, we have appeals protest, we have litigation, where we go see the good judge. We have compliance and ethics, legal services, and legal operations. So tax policy is really active right now because they deal with all the legislation that's going on during session. We always have our own agency bill, but all of the legislators have ideas of their own as well. So at the beginning of session, we were tracking over 160 bills that had an impact on how we do what we do at the Department of Revenue. And so going throughout the whole session, we have to monitor, what's moving, what's dead, who's putting what amendments into what bills, and are we able to administer what they would ultimately want us to administer out of those laws. The other thing that the policy team does is they write guidance. So they write guidance to individuals. We could have a taxpayer come to us and say, hey, we're going to open a manufacturing company. We're going to buy all of these materials. Here's our manufacturing process. We're going to make this widget. What are the tax consequences of that? And as long as they're willing to tell us who they are, which they're not always, and give us enough facts to render a good decision, we'll issue a revenue ruling, which is binding against the department. So you have some certainty there. If they won't tell us who they are, we issue an advisory opinion, which is just that. It's advisory. It's not binding at all, but it's guidance anyway. And then we also issue general guidance interpreting statute called information bulletins, where you can go and you can read an information bulletin, and it will really lay out how the department is looking at a certain type of tax or circumstance. If a taxpayer is unhappy with the fact that we assess them tax, which who isn't unhappy with that, or we denied a refund, they have 60 days where they can file a protest, and it's an administrative protest. They come to the department. They can request to have a hearing in front of a hearing officer. It's not an ALJ. It's a much more informal process. But the important thing there is the hearing officer is impartial. They're not there on behalf of the department. They're not there on behalf of the taxpayer. Their job is to collect information from the taxpayer, research the law, apply the law, and then issue a written finding, which is published in the Indiana Register and is binding against the department. So it's a really powerful position for an attorney to be a hearing officer who's issuing these decisions on behalf of the department. But the really cool thing there, like everything we do on the legal team, is their job is to get to the right answer. They're not protecting revenue. They're not trying to squeeze money out of a taxpayer. Not a penny more, not a penny less. They're researching law and applying law. And so that's our appeals team. If a taxpayer is still unhappy with what happens from the appeal, then they run off to Judge McAdam and file a complaint with the tax court. And we've got a litigation group that works with the Office of the Attorney General. We can't represent ourselves in court. You know the saying anyway, right? The fool for a client. But the Office of the Attorney General is our attorney when we litigate, unless we can seek outside counsel, which we do on occasion. So those three kind of operate on a timeline. The fourth area I'll talk about is our legal services team. Mr. Brandel is part of that team. They're basically in-house counsel for the department. When the department needs representation for anything that we do, signing a lease, signing a contract, a memorandum of understanding, we get a public records request from somebody seeking access to documents or something. That's all done through our legal services team. They also represent motor carrier services operation, which you may not know. What BMV does for personal vehicles, the department does for commercial vehicles. We represent fleets of vehicles. Carriers can choose where they want to register vehicles. So you have 50 states, 25% of all motor carrier vehicles are actually registered in Indiana around the country because of the work that team does. And the legal services team provides legal advice to them. The fifth team is the compliance and ethics team. They do things like make sure that we're not accepting gifts that we're not supposed to accept and all that. But the biggest function that they serve is related to IRS Publication 1075. And what Pub 1075 does is it tells us what we have to do in order to be able to receive federal taxpayer information. That's important to us because when you go and file your return, The number that you're starting with on your Indiana return is your federal AGI from your federal return. So we have to have access to FTI in order to cross-match what's being reported federally versus what's being reported on the state return. Gives us a lot of auditing capability that we don't have to deploy resources for above that AGI number. So we have an audit with the IRS every 3 years. We actually just came out of that audit about 2 weeks ago. And they're coming in and looking at everything from our IT systems to our physical structure. Do we have badge access to our doors? Is FTI being locked up? Are things getting shredded where it needs to get shredded? And so they come in and take a look and say, you're good to go, and then we'll see them again in another 3 years. And then the last team I'll mention is our legal operations team. They're really the backbone of everything that we do. They're not lawyers. They're kind of paralegals. For the appeals team, they'll receive the protest and they take the initial look at it. A lot of things that come in don't necessarily need an attorney. If we just need a form, if somebody needs to provide us a W-2, the legal ops team can do that and they can close out the protest. If it actually needs to go to a hearing officer, though, they'll compile all the documents into a file to be able to hand to the hearing officer and have the hearing officer then go and administer the hearing. They're also
Thank you so much, Chris. If you just have any last comments, I just want to make sure there's enough time to hear from Dan as well. Thank you so much.
Great things about public service. You don't bill 7-8 minute increments, you bill in 7.5 hour increments. There's a lot of good benefits, vacation time, public service, loan forgiveness if you have student loan debt. But again, I mentioned before, one of the best things that I love about my job is the fact that our job is to get to the right answer. If you have a private client, they're paying you to advance their interest. For us, it's literally to research the law and apply the law and get to the right answer. Hey, Alex.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of questions about the cougar, but we'll save them for later. All right, and last but not least, Dan and students, if you have any questions, feel free to start thinking of them now because there will be time for them at the end.
Thank you. So before I get started, I'd like to take a chance to introduce Chris Clare and Josh Brandel. If you two would stand up and wave, let them know who you are. You already met Leah. She's the third piece of this puzzle. Josh and Chris have been they're the law student reps with the council, and they are the ones that have been the tip of the spear, if you will, of coordinating with McKinney, Maurer, and Notre Dame law schools, and so they put in a ton of work. And interesting, Josh works for the Department of Revenue, and Chris is a longtime attorney that is back in law school getting an LLM in tax, which is how he is the tax representative. But I hired Chris as a deputy general counsel at the BMV when I was general counsel there. So I go back with Chris a little bit as well. But he's transitioning away from the BMV now and is going back into private practice in Columbus, if I remember correctly. So thanks so much to them. I have a extremely non-traditional path into tax. I was at IU Bloomington and was ROTC when I was here. Graduated and was commissioned as an artillery officer and deployed to Iraq in 2003. I remember studying for my LSAT next to a bombed out runway in a tent in Balad, Iraq in 2003, and decided at that point that if I got into law school, I was going to go, and if not, I was going to stay in the Army. So here I am talking to you guys. But after my service ended, I went straight into law school in Oklahoma City, which is where my then girlfriend, now wife, lived. She graduated from the University of Oklahoma and lived in Oklahoma City. And so went to law school, luckily, with a buddy of mine from the Army, and we were in the same section 1L year, and it worked out great. But I graduated law school in 2008, and for those of you that remember 2008, that was really the height of the Great Recession, and law firms were laying off associates and junior partners who were then taking all the entry-level legal jobs. And so I took the Indiana bar, passed it. My wife and I decided for her career we were going to move to Kansas City. And I took the Kansas bar, so I'm also licensed in Kansas, in case you have any Kansas law-related things. And then we ended up moving back ultimately to Indiana. My first job was with the Department of Revenue as an inheritance tax attorney. Now, that was not my really first foray into tax law because I was only there 3 months because I got an offer unsolicited on my part from the city of Indianapolis to come and work for them in a non-legal capacity. There was a lot of law involved, but I wasn't actually an attorney with the city in 2 different capacities, and I was there for 3 years. And then I went into private practice and was the managing partner of a small law firm in Indianapolis for a couple of years. When you run a small practice, by the way, and you're the managing partner, you're spending half of your time running a business and not actually being able to do billable hours. And so I wasn't necessarily looking to leave, but I had an opportunity to go and be the chief counsel for the advisory division of the Attorney General's office. I had 15 attorneys, and we provided advisory counsel to state agencies, most state agencies that are too small to have their own embedded attorney. We also provided advisory opinions for state officials, the legislature, the governor's office, and various state agencies. And we reviewed all 6,000 or 7,000 contracts for form and legality for the state of Indiana, and then also approved for form and legality all of the administrative rules that were being drafted by the state. So that was a really interesting part of my work in government. There was some tax involved there, but I would not call myself a tax attorney because of that job. I then went to work for the Department of Local Government Finance, and I told the story to the group of your leaders on the phone last week. But Judge McAdam was not a judge yet. He was the general counsel and deputy director of Office of Management and Budget, and he was doing the interview for the general counsel of DLGF. And we met at a Starbucks, and one of the questions he asked me is if I'm afraid of math. And it took me a little by surprise, and I said, well, no. As long as we're talking about addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, because if we're talking about calculus, this is not going to go well. I'm not the right guy for this job. And he smiled and said, I think that'll be fine. And so Justin hired me, and I started at the department as general counsel and ultimately became general counsel and chief of staff. The DLGF is a small, I would just say small but mighty agency. There's between 40 and 50 employees at any given time at the agency, and they're responsible for 2 things. One is they oversee, provide training for, and provide certification for all of the locally elected assessors. That oversight is of the assessment process, right? So all real and personal property assessment in the state of Indiana is overseen by the Department of Local Government Finance. That's one side of what we do. The other side is the budget team. And we have a number of field reps and 2,500 political subdivisions in the state, to include counties, municipalities, townships, special taxing districts, conservancy districts. Anybody who collects a property tax, the DLGF has to certify their annual budget. And that is where I really started to get into calling myself a tax lawyer, because a lot of this is in Title VI 1.1, and we ensure that the budgets that are presented to the DLGF are fundable, right? Are you projected to have enough revenue coming in to satisfy the budget that you have presented? And that is a very interesting process. We deal with excise tax, we deal with financial institution tax. We deal with local income tax because that's another revenue source. And so that was where I really started to enjoy tax.
About a minute left.
What's that?
About a minute left. If you have any last words of wisdom.
Well, I will say that the best part about tax now, currently, I represent local government units and straddle the government services practice group at Frost Brown Todd and the public finance practice group. And so I represent them in a myriad of aspects, general counsel work, open door law, access to public records, and so on, but also am able to advise them on how they should structure things in order to maximize the revenue that they can bring in as it relates to property taxes, local income taxes, and so on that are available to those local government units. So it's fascinating work to me, and I get to continue. I thought about wearing a suit today, but I decided that would be disingenuous because this is what I practice in, right? I dress like this for my clients, and so anyway, that's a little bit about what I do.
Thank you so much. So we do have a few minutes left. I'm going to turn it over to Aiden to coordinate any questions from you.
Perfect. Thank you, Hillary, and thank you, the five of you. This was tremendous, and I think we should just give them a round of applause for saying that. So as Hillary said, we have about 8 minutes, and we just want to turn the floor over to you guys. Let out any questions you have. They're here for you, and we wanted to set this up specifically so that you could get your questions answered.
Yeah, so I feel that the overwhelming majority of law school classes based around tax focus on federal, it seems like federal income tax. Coming out of law school, do you feel prepared to tackle things like property, estate taxes, like all these other types of taxation?
Anybody in particular? Yeah.
How about no? No, didn't know anything about it. When I got hired to join the Office of Management and Budget, to join OMB, a friend of mine, he worked in the legislature, and I said, I don't know anything about tax. And he said, you'll be fine, you're smart. And he was right, actually. The reality is, tax seems scary, and you have good people around you. You've met some of them at this table who I had around me. But the reality is, it's like any other highly regulated, complex field of law. Before I was a tax lawyer, I was a campaign finance lawyer, so another highly regulated, high stakes area of law. But the reality was, you begin to peel that back in layers, and you start to see those sort of patterns that you find in other places. And I'm the judge of the tax court, but I learn every day. I really don't, I wouldn't be qualified to do your tax return, right? That's not what I do. I could learn that, I suppose, but I'm probably going to hire that out to Adria or Tyler if I really have a tough question. And they're probably not going to know the answer to all the questions that we have either. And so it's really an opportunity to keep learning and to look to others to help strengthen what you're doing.
And I don't think that's any different than any other area of the law. Once you come out of law school, you're going to have to learn the ins and outs of that particular area in order to become an expert practitioner in that area. So it's just a different way to get to your ultimate goal.
And I'll say too, even if you're just learning federal tax in law school, that's still not going to prepare you for a federal tax practice, because I don't know anybody who would know the entire Internal Revenue Code, right? That's just impossible. But
There's one.
Well, yes, and it's guaranteed employment, right? Tax is guaranteed employment because they are always changing their minds. But it teaches you how to think like a tax attorney, where to look for the answers, what to do with that information, and then how to apply it. So that's what I think. Even though you may not be getting that state experience, it's still very helpful and can be translated to a state tax practice. That's what you're interested in.
Yeah, you're learning to learn in law school. You're not learning everything that you need to know to then leave and go practice law. You're learning how to then go find those things at a later date. just like the judge said, I'm learning every day, which I love. I mean, it's fascinating that I could be at the department for going on 9 years now, and somebody will come to me with a question, and it's like, I didn't know we did that. And so now you're having to relearn a new area. My great uncle, who's one of the guys that practiced law that got me interested in law, he graduated from law school at the age of 20. So he did undergraduate and law school in 3 years at the same time, took the bar, passed it, made him take it again because he wasn't 21. He practiced from 21 until when he passed away at 86. So he said, you should have to pay a firm your first couple of years because they're still having to teach you. It's your law school education never stops. So don't be afraid of it. I stayed away from it for 2 decades because it seemed really, really hard and boring to me, and I was right on one, wrong on the other. It is hard, but it's learnable and it's fascinating. So if you're interested, dig in.
Yeah, on that, like you're learning levels of authority here, right? How to interpret statutory law, the sources of the law, right? Like primary versus secondary. I mean, I can't tell you how often if I give like a staff or a senior at our firm an issue and I say, hey, go research this, bring to me a summary, right, of what we think the position should be here based on the law. And so many times, and this is part of my learning or teaching process too, I'll get handed like a B&A, right? And that's their source. I'm like, you can't cite a summary, right, or a treatise. I'm like, that's not what we're doing here. It's like, go back to the drawing board. And so, you're learning to think. Truly, that's what you're doing here. And you're able to take that knowledge and apply that to, frankly, whether it's the Internal Revenue Code or any other part of the U.S. code, right? Like or state authority as well, you are learning how to interpret law, to analyze, digest, and ultimately summarize and take a client's position, whether that be for the state, whether it be for a private company, an individual. That's what you're doing here.
I have one other tip here too. If you are looking for some actual experience, there are a lot of great pro bono opportunities that are available. Not only is it gives you an opportunity to actually have a client, figure out what needs to be done to help this client. It's somebody who really needs assistance but cannot afford to have that assistance. There's a disproportionate number of underprivileged individuals who are in need of tax assistance and they can't afford it. And it also it's good, again, resume building if you have had that practical experience. And it's also just something very good to do with your law degree. I feel like we as attorneys, and particularly tax attorneys, have a special skill set, and we should really use that to help people out. So
I'll make it, building on Adria's pitch, I'll make a pitch for each of you here, which is, as the tax court, I take interns every summer who come and serve. Usually hire one student to come serve for an entire summer and do anything a law clerk would do. Depending on your skill, you might get to write opinions. But I also take externs too throughout the school year, and so you can get credit for that depending on what the school allows. And you come work on a part-time basis, half day a week, 1 day a week, and get some practical exposure to the court and to tax law through that. So encourage any of you who might be interested in that to send a resume.
Likewise, the department has a really robust internship program as well. We had 9 or 10 legal interns last year. You can talk to Alex. He spent the summer with us last year. We have interns in the policy team, in our appeals team, and they're actually writing letters of findings and with attorney supervision, but getting things published. And then our legal services team, our in-house counsel, we have internship opportunities there. And we not only expose the interns to the department, but also to virtually every other state agency, so you can see what working in state government looks like.
Well, thank you. I think that's just about the time that we have. I understand that a lot of you probably have some classes to get to soon. But once again, we just want to thank each of you up here. I mean, this was tremendous. We thank you so much for coming down. I think we just need to give you guys one last round of applause. And then I'll turn it over to John if he has any last things to say.
Thanks again, everybody, for coming out. Make sure you eat all the food. Also, feel free to hang around a little bit afterwards, and please come up and talk to our wonderful panelists. Introduce yourselves, ask them questions. I know they'd all love to get the opportunity to meet you. Thanks again. Thank you, panelists.